I was looking at what USDA would do with the feed and residual number on corn following the March 1 stocks number, and they did lower their projection for the year by 50 million bushels, which I thought was a bit of a surprise. I thought they might hold steady. On soybeans, we did see a bump up in the export projection, which I think is probably justified by our current pace of shipments and sales. I was thinking maybe a 10 million increase. We saw 15, so I think everything pretty much within the realm of expectations, maybe a slight surprise on the corn feed number. What we look at is the March 1 stocks number, and we use that to calculate feed and residual disappearance during the second quarter of the marketing year, and then we combine that with the disappearance during the first quarter, so obviously you get total disappearance through the first half, and then ask the question, is the pace in the first half sufficient to reach what USDA is projecting for the year? And we did see first half use about 68% of what USDA had been projecting at 5.3 billion bushels, and thought that was sufficient pace of consumption to justify holding the number at 5.3. They chose to take 50 million bushels off of that number. We really are. As I mentioned, I think soybean exports have been a little stronger than expected and justified the increase in the projection. For the first half of the year, corn exports were really disappointing, and I think raised some question whether we could reach USDA's number. But pace has really picked up in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and the pace of sales has also accelerated. So now I think we're pretty comfortable that we can reach the 1.65 billion bushels that USDA continues to forecast. I don't think strong implications. It's not a complete surprise. I think given the weather conditions in Argentina have been generally moist there, that we might see a slight increase in production numbers. So I don't think it'll really alter the expectations of U.S. exports at this point. The bigger question, I think, longer term, being the next month or so, is really going to be Brazilian corn weather. We are seeing some early indications of some stress there. If that persists, that becomes a bigger story, I think, than what we saw in today's numbers. I tend to think there will be some modest switching given the price reaction we've had since that report was released. Soybeans are considerably stronger than when the survey was done, and corn prices are steady to a bit weaker than when the farmers were surveyed. So I wouldn't be surprised to see up to 1 million acres perhaps move away from corn to soybeans or perhaps some other crops. But again, 1 million acres probably doesn't alter the supply expectation very much. A bit of an expectation. I first would say that our calculation of trend yield for both corn and soybeans would be a bit less than USDA's calculated trend. So we start a little lower than they start. And then we continue to monitor the El Nino episode that tends to be fading pretty quickly right now. And that suggests to us that we may have an elevated risk of below trend yields this year. So we start with a lower trend yield on corn, 166.2, and then I'd want to fade that 3 or 4 bushels in my expectation right now. We'd start at 45.2 bushels on soybeans and fade that a bushel or so based on the El Nino. If you buy into that scenario, and not everybody does, but if you're really looking for that kind of switch in acreage and below trend yields, that says to me to remain patient on new crop pricing, that while we have seen some strength in soybean prices, I think there's some more upside potential, and I think corn continues to drag along the bottom. So I don't see a lot of downside risk there. Certainly, depending on how summer weather unfolds, we could see some big yields again, but I don't think the market's going to reflect that anytime soon. So I think steady as we go, remain patient, and give the market a little more chance.